I'll just come out of the gate right away and say it as it is. 2022 is just not a great year to buy a house. And neither has been 2021. So things have just not gotten better for buyers. In fact, they've gotten worse. And it's a tough feeling because if you've been thinking about buying a house, it feels a little bit like jumping over a gap that keeps on getting wider while you're contemplating if you should jump or not. And I know a lot of people are stuck with that decision because the market is not improving from a buyer's point of view. And so waiting longer doesn't seem to make things better, and jumping now doesn't seem to be such a good idea either. So today I want to share my thoughts on the topic, and hopefully you can gain some clarity on what you should be doing. Let's start with a quick recap. So a lot of people started to rethink the housing situation when they were stuck in their apartment during the initial COVID lockdown. And they never pulled the trigger because it just didn't seem like a good time to buy. There was not a whole lot of inventory, not a lot of options on the market. And in fairness, a lot of sellers were hesitating in putting the house on the market because they were just not comfortable having 50 strangers coming through the living room on a weekend. So this led to a very competitive market at the time, and it was just not a good time to buy. And a lot of people were just hoping that things would get better once we were past COVID and things would get back to normal. So we finally got through COVID, but instead of the expected real estate market cool down, we have seen the pace further increase and the market got even more competitive. It seemed like for every seller who was ready to put the house on the market, there were multiple buyers that also joined the marketplace. So we kept in this imbalanced state of supply and demand that is just completely out of whack. And now on top of that, we're also seeing mortgage rates increasing, and that is creating an additional urgency because a lot of people want to buy a house before rates are increasing even further. So what is the right thing to do here? There is so much conflicting information out there, and good advice is really hard to come by. When you listen to your friends and family or when you look on the internet, a lot of people expressing the opinion that this is not sustainable and this is an exuberance, the market has to cool down and correct eventually. And that feels about right, especially here in Milwaukee, because we've never seen anything like this in our lifetimes. We're just not used to seeing real estate prices going up in double digits every year. And so the question really becomes, is it foolish to buy a house now, potentially at the peak of the market? I know a lot of people are worried about this, that they say, oh my God, in hindsight, I look back and I bought the house when it was the most expensive. I should have really waited a year or two. I could have gotten a much better deal. Or you could also look back and say, well, I should have bought a house in 2022 because back then houses were still affordable and now they're not affordable anymore. So I can't give you the answer ultimately to what the future will hold, but we can take a look at some options and some scenarios. Let me walk you through where we currently stand. So after the record-setting year of 2021, we had the highest sales prices and the highest sales volume on record, even here in Milwaukee locally. Everybody expected 2022 to mellow down a little bit, to cool down a little bit. With still a very, very hot market, prices going up, but just less aggressive than we've seen it in 2021. Now we have gotten the latest round of industry experts and their home price prediction for this year. And when you average them out, they all have increased their forecasts, and we're looking now at plus 9% for the US housing market. In Milwaukee, we're right on track with that. Actually, I think we're a little bit ahead, and we might finish the year again with a double-digit appreciation. But that is not all bad news. It just depends on which side of the equation you are. If you're currently a homeowner, that's fantastic because that means on average you will gain about $30,000 in equity this year. And to make matters worse, the cost of borrowing has also gone up. Mortgage rates have gone up quite a bit over the last few weeks. If you follow my YouTube channel, you know this from my last market update. We are now looking at rates over 5% for a 30-year fixed, and if your credit score is not perfect, you might be looking at even over 6%. So of course, this is a big sticker shock after we have been spoiled for the last 2 years with extremely low interest rates. But when you look at this at a historical context, you see that rates are just back to normal. So what we had the last 2 years, that was actually an exception. Rates around 5 or 6% are very much just a normal rate in the historical context. What can we expect from the next few months? So according to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they are expecting rates to increase further, not as fast as we have seen it in the last few weeks, but they are expecting rates to continue to increase for the balance of 2022 and also well into 23. Now here is something that will surprise you, but when I explain it, it will make perfect sense. So with the double whammy of higher home prices and higher mortgage rates, you would think that the sales volume would go down. But in fact, we're expecting 2022 to be another record-setting year in terms of home sales. So the number of homes that are changing ownership this year. For the US, this could mean 6.5 million home sales. In Milwaukee, we might be seeing more than 11,000, possibly even 12,000 single-family homes changing ownership. Now, why is this happening? People have different requirements now on their homes. There's different needs, and they have known that for a couple of years, but they haven't done anything about it because of COVID. Now, what are these needs that have changed? Number one, you have demographic shifts. So we have, for example, baby boomers that are retiring now. So that is a classic trigger for a change in housing. And then famously, we have millennials aging into the prime home buying years. The oldest millennials now turning 40. So they are really in that age where they want to buy a home. The other factor that's also making a big impact is that working remotely, working from home is here to stay, at least to some extent. And people are looking for 1 or 2 home offices. From these very large homes, they are starting trending now because they can accommodate working from home so much better. Another very, very important factor that we have to keep in mind is inflation. So I think a lot of people are thinking about inflation the wrong way. They are thinking about it as a temporary inconvenience where prices are going up and maybe later on they're coming down again. But that is not what inflation is. If you've been following my channel, you know this. Inflation is because we have printed so many dollars that the purchase power of the dollar is actually coming down. So it takes more dollars to buy the same goods and services than you would have needed a year ago. So in terms of the housing market, it's not necessarily only so much that houses are going up in price. It's just that the dollar is losing value and now you need more dollars to pay for the same type of house than before. If you look at the history, inflation is usually not that short-lived. It is quite a massive effort for the Fed to get inflation under control. And historically, it has always taken a few years. So personally, I think inflation is here to stay with us for quite a while. And one of the consequences of inflation is that rents will also continue to go up. You probably already know this from the news. The Fed is now fighting very actively inflation. They're doing this by taking money out of the system. And also they continue to hike up interest rates, which makes the cost of borrowing more expensive. And that is designed to cool off the economy. I think that's the right thing to do. I think that's a very healthy thing. They have put a lot of money, maybe too much money, into the economy to keep it going during the lockdowns. And now they have to backpedal and pull it out again. And that's a very tricky thing to do to manage that soft landing and not damage the economy too much. So personally, I think there is a very good chance that we might be slipping into a recession in the near future. Now, what does a recession potentially mean for the housing market? The answer can be found very easily when you go back in time. Historically, home values have not been affected very much by economic recessions. The only exception was 2008, and that was really a mortgage crisis that ultimately led us into an economic recession and not the other way around. So considering all this, what are your options? Let's take a look at a scenario. Let's say you were to buy a house this year only to find out next year that the market is softening and real estate prices are either going sideways or they're coming down. Well, based on everything we know, this is not very likely, just simply based on inflation alone, but theoretically it's possible. So one of the biggest reasons that could bring down the housing market would be rising mortgage rates. So that would mean that even if you could realize those savings and buy the same house for less money, it would be offset by the higher mortgage rates because you would be financing at a higher cost. So that is a risk that you have. You might be losing out on those savings. But on the other hand, most importantly, when you buy a house and you finance it with a fixed rate mortgage, you are locking in your monthly payments for the next 30 years. So whatever the amount is that you pay every month, it doesn't matter what inflation is going to do over the next years, that dollar amount is not going to change. It is always going to be the same. And that is very different than if you're renting. Your rent is subject to inflation and might be going up every year. So one of the big benefits of buying a house is that you're locking in your cost of housing and is not going to change anymore. So the predictability of your housing expenses for you and your family are one of the big benefits to consider. But what if the economists and their forecasts are wrong and the housing market softens or comes down? What does that mean for you? So first of all, your monthly payments are locked in, and regardless what the economy is doing or what inflation is doing, your monthly payment is the same. Your home value does not really matter until you're ready to put the home on the market. And we know from statistics that this happens in average after 8 to 10 years. Then you will put your home on the market. And that is when it will matter if your home value has gone up or if it has gone down. Now, when you look up the history of US home values, you can see this very easily. There is no period of time where home values have gone down for a sustained time for that long of a period. So even if you have bought in the worst housing crash of the history at the peak at 2008, 8 to 10 years later, it wouldn't have mattered anymore because the market has recovered from that point. So that is the downside. But there is also an upside. If the forecasts of the economists are correct and home prices continue to go up, at least with the rate of inflation, maybe even faster than inflation because of the supply and demand issues, then you would have significant upside because that means your home value would go up and you would have generated a healthy chunk of equity. Okay, so option number 2 is that you're not buying a house in 2022 and you are deciding to rent for another year and see if the market conditions are improving and if buying your first home is going to be easier and or cheaper. So when you look at the rents, you can see very easily that rents have steadily increased over the last 50 years. And this is a trend that we have seen to accelerate actually in the last 2 years. So Milwaukee rents have gone up 8.3% since before COVID. And the pace at which rents are going up is actually increasing because landlords are facing higher costs of owning and operating their portfolio. Cost of labor, cost of material is going up. Just think about replacing appliances. Appliances are a lot more expensive now than they have been before COVID. So odds are that rents are going to increase and you might find yourself in a situation where the gap that you're trying to jump from a not homeowner to a homeowner has grown wider than it is currently today. Now, there could be, of course, a situation where it might be beneficial to wait. For example, if you're expecting a job promotion with a significant jump in increase, then it could make sense that you stay renting for a little while longer before you actually jump into the housing market. So this has actually been a pretty tricky message for me to deliver, and I've been scratching my head for quite a while on how to best present this, because a lot of you are naturally skeptical, and it's good that you are. And you're thinking, of course, according to a real estate agent, it's always a good time to buy and sell a house. Why not? So consider this for a second. When you have a market that is so hot that you have 10 offers within 1 day on a single property, that means 9 agents have done all the work, all the running around, all the drafting of contracts and negotiating, and then they have to go back to square one for nothing. So my team and I have never been working harder and more hours to make our clients successful than we have been working in the past 2 years. So I would love to tell you that the market is slowing down, because that would make my life a whole lot easier, and please believe me, I will be watching the data like a hawk. I'll continue to talk to people. A lot of you, I'm sure, will remember that I asked you in the last couple of weeks, how have the rising interest rates impacted you? What are you thinking about the market? Are you changing your plans? Are you still doing the same thing? So hopefully the market is going to slow down eventually, because that would actually be a really good thing. But it doesn't look like this is going to happen anytime soon. So what can you do if you're still on the fence and undecided about buying a property this year or next year? Well, first of all, subscribe to my YouTube channel and watch my monthly market updates. I will continue to put all the data and information in front of you, and so you can see if there is a change in trend, if there's a change in the information. You will always be updated what's going on in the Milwaukee and in the national real estate market. The other thing you can do is get a login to the local Milwaukee MLS and keep tabs on what's going on in the market. So MLS is the professional platform that all brokers are using when they're looking at properties or they're marketing properties. All of those listings are on the MLS. Agents are not looking on Zillow or on Realtor.com when they're looking for properties. And you can get access to the MLS by requesting a client login, which we can set up for you. So all you have to do is go on my website, onpointrg.com, and click on that button that says request access to the MLS. You'll answer a few questions about what price range you're looking and in what area, and then we can set that up for you. Of course, you can reach out directly to me as well with any questions and comments. In fact, I love hearing from you. A lot of people are sending me an email after they've seen one of my videos with some follow-up questions. If you want to, you can also text me. You have my cell phone number here on the screen, or you can call me directly. Just don't be surprised when I actually pick up, because that's what I do. So we can discuss your personal situation, the best timing for your scenario, and how to go about it. It usually takes about 4 to 6 months, so that's about the time frame that you should have in mind when you start looking about housing Milwaukee. That's all I had for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.